what I'd really like to get to the point, get across is actually that it is not so much the software that is important. It is an important aspect, whether it is usable and easy to use, and whether you like using it, whether it fulfills the purposes. But it's actually around the concept of why you want to have an e-portfolio, why you're looking into portfolio work or competency assessment outside of a learning management system. Because most e-portfolio projects really fail because there's not really a good concept behind it, or that there are high expectations but then no support. And so what we are really looking at today is what can you actually do with an e-portfolio. And of course, since we work on Mahara, we are focusing on Mahara examples. But a lot of those things can also be just translated into e-portfolio work in general. So Mahara was actually development started in New Zealand around 2005-2006. So we are actually having our 10th anniversary this year, which is really, really exciting because it is growing not just here in New Zealand, but also around the world. And it's fantastic to see how it is being used in many different contexts, from schools, from primary schools, all the way to tertiary and further education, and then also in other organizations. And so what we do with it is actually a number of things. So in contrast to a learning management system, you oftentimes in an e-portfolio create evidence or artifacts, and Mahara allows you to create that directly in the environment. And I'll make these slides available afterwards, if you like, so that you also have all the links that I'm using for you to explore the examples on your own in your own time. So what you do, and the nice thing about using an e-portfolio is we can create the artifacts directly online. We can write a journal entry, a blog entry, and draft it, save it online, save it in the environment, and then come back to it. So creating of content is really easy. But you can also collect evidence, because oftentimes we have a certificate or PowerPoint or presentation or any images, videos maybe that really show what we have done, that we wouldn't be able to actually create online. And so being able to upload those things as files into the environment and make it part of your collection of evidence is really important. And that brings us to the third part, why an electronic e-portfolio is great, because you can aggregate all your evidence from many different sites. So you aggregate what's on your computer, put that online so that other people can see it. You create your content directly online in the platform, but then also a number of things actually sit in other systems. Your learning management system, maybe you have a YouTube channel and you publish things there, or you use a cartoon creator to create resources that you'd like to add into your professional development portfolio. And so Mahara can't do all of that. It's not a cartoon creator, it's not a video editor, it's not a number of things. But what we can do is we can aggregate all of that into your portfolio so that you have one-stop shop to look at everything, and you don't need to send many different links to your colleagues or to an assessor in order to tell them, well, for this part you need to go over here, for that part you need to go there, and then you go over here for the third item. But they can just be in, everything is in one place. And of course, a very important part of portfolios, no matter the purpose, is reflection. And last week I was at the Dean's Conference, which is a conference primarily for tertiary educators around open, flexible, distance, and also e-learning, blended learning. And there it was mentioned in a lot of presentations, not necessarily focusing on portfolios in itself, but in general that reflecting is really important, and that also showing evidence is important these days. And that's what you do in an e-portfolio. An e-portfolio is not quite an e-portfolio if it only contains the evidence. Because if you as assessor just look at the evidence, you draw your own conclusions, which may not be why the learner has actually put the evidence into the portfolio. And you might come to different conclusions than what they like you to come to. And so having the reflection there really helps to also understand why this piece of evidence is so important for the learner, why they put it in, why they think that piece of evidence helps them to meet a standard if you're looking at competency assessment. And so reflecting is extremely important, and that's where it's also different to a lot of the other activities we do in learning management systems. Because in a learning management system, we upload an essay that's around a topic, or we participate in a quiz, but afterwards we are not asked by the lecturer to reflect on our experience of doing the quiz and what we have learned from it. And so that's one of the very distinguishing factors of an e-portfolio. And we can also curate our content. So earlier I already mentioned that we can aggregate learning evidence, and curating goes back also into the reflecting part. An e-portfolio is not just an archive or a backup of all your files from a computer. It is really just specific things that you put in there for either showing your development over a period of time, showing competencies, showing off what you have done in order to apply for a job, and things like that. So it's not just a dumping ground for everything that you have done, but it is a selection of what you have done, depending on the purpose why you created a portfolio. That's where curation comes in really importantly, because you do need to look at things why you want to include it. And then what you can do in the platform now that you have all your learning evidence in place is that you can present that, and present that all in one place. So you can place things next to each other to make the connections between the very different learning evidence, pieces of evidence that you've had, no matter whether they are living on a social media site or as an uploaded file. You can make those connections between them. And then, very importantly, you can share those with others. Creating a portfolio for yourself is really nice, because then you see what you have done. But what we're actually doing more and more is sharing that, so that you can either share it with friends, with colleagues, get their feedback, share it with assessors so they can take a look at it, give you feedback on it, and be part of your learning community. Because through their feedback, again, you make changes to how you work or what you're going to do next, and especially if you use a portfolio for professional development. Through the feedback, you learn from them, and you might adjust a syllabus, or you might try something else, try a new tool that a colleague of you proposed. And that's possible because you've outlined or you've reflected on your learning, said, I still need to do X, Y, Z, and then your colleague can pick up on that and said, well, actually, hey, I have a perfect idea what you could try. And that way you improve through learning with others, through that social interaction with your colleagues, friends, assessors, or anybody else who has access to it. And that's the collaborative aspect. So while Mahara is primarily an e-portfolio system, we actually also have collaborative features in there. So you can have group discussions, you can share files with each other, and you can even create group portfolios. And that's what a number of people have started doing more and more. For example, Richard Edwards at the University of Waikato. He teaches future primary school teachers, and so he actually has a research project on students creating group portfolios. And like in any collaborative environment, students divvy up tasks, and so there might be the expert in the technology who actually creates the content and puts the content in and arranges it in the portfolio, but it is still a group project where everybody contributes to it. And that's again where we don't have to be on our own creating a portfolio. So it can really be a portfolio around a group. If you two, for example, work together in the same unit, Joe and Joss, that you can kind of collaborate on things or create a plan for moving forward. And if you have the same professional development experiences, then you can also share that with each other and work together. And in those groups, you can also network. On myportfolio.school.nz, which is the nationwide Mahara platform that is accessible to all schools for free, so that students and teachers can at least have a portfolio throughout their entire school career. Back in 2011, we set up a group in which anybody could join in, and that we used for supporting users. Because oftentimes as you know yourself, because most of you are somewhere on the support end for whatever you're doing in your organization, you have a lot of people coming with the same questions. And then kind of answering the same question over and over again can be quite tedious and can be quite time consuming. And so we thought, well, let's use the capabilities of the platform, create a group that anybody can join, because then we can use a forum discussion where people can ask questions. We answer the questions, but also any other teacher who is in the group. And then again, we learn from each other so that we share the experiences. And that has been working really well, because we did get teachers who were new to using portfolios, for example, who would have never asked a question, to lurk in the forums and learn implicitly. Learn just by the questions from other people and got inspired to try something out, or maybe check out what another teacher has done and get some ideas that they could try out in their own classroom. And also that way we answer one question and help many people at the same time. So kind of not just looking at a portfolio, as the portfolio platform that you can use to create your personal portfolio, but especially if you are in an organization where you do want to also bring in your staff more, kind of want to start more social learning activities or informal or non-formal learning things, then the ePortfolio platform Mahara could be helpful for that, because those groups can be created very easily. And in contrast to a learning management system, they don't necessarily have to go through an approval process, because they are on a less formalized level. On my portfolio, for example, we have over 100,000 students, and we don't police any of the groups. So they create groups whenever they want. There are some funny groups on there, like I love ice cream, or how many people I can get into my group, or other things that, granted, may not be the best groups or most efficient and effective ones, but they allow the students to get together, to have conversations, to form groups for studying or just for a small project, without having to go to an administrator asking, then having a request sent through, and a group set up. So kind of making ways short and quick. And if there's a problem with the group, if it does contain kind of content or language that people could object to, then a request can be sent to the site administrators to take the group down, or most often what we actually do is kind of talk with the teachers and ask them to talk with the students, so it's more of a learning experience rather than a policing thing and just deleting content. So these are all the things that you can do in an ePortfolio that maybe you hadn't necessarily thought of before, because it's really a lot of things that you can do and that might fit into the framework of how you perceive learning at your own organization. And so what I wanted to do now is just show you a few screenshots in this case, but you always have the link directly to the sites, to show you how versatile it can also be. Give you some examples of what people do with Mahara. We won't have time to look into them in close detail, but as I said, you will be able to do that afterwards, to explore them more, and then also focus on the ones that interest you most. So this is the already mentioned myportfolio.school.nz site. It is the biggest Mahara site in the world. There are over 1,700 schools registered at the moment, and we have over 100,000 students on it. That doesn't mean that the use is 100,000 people every single day, because if you've already worked with portfolios, you know that oftentimes kind of the usage of a portfolio is up and down, because you don't necessarily do something in it every single day or every single hour, but you might ask your students to reflect on their entire week. So they might go in there once a week or every other week or twice a week. What we've seen on my portfolio, though, is that students even go in there during their holidays, like what you've never seen in a learning management system, I think, because they talk to each other. They use their profile page to leave each other messages on the wall. So I have that social aspect in there. They can upload images. They can share those images with each other. And so they don't just use the site for learning, but also for communicating with each other. This is an example from Europe. EU Portfolio or EU Folio, that was an initiative that looked at a lot of different e-portfolio systems in Europe, in particular in the school sector, and wanted to find out what are people doing with it. And they did also set up a Mahara instance so that schools and students can register for that. And as you see, it looks very different from my portfolio, because you can decide on what it should look like. This next example looks even more different. This is from the University of the Arts in London. It's a design school. And so what they have done is they customized their Mahara instance so that all public pages are actually discoverable on the home page. So if you go to that site, you can just click on the student projects and see how very different they've done things, even without needing any login there. Because oftentimes we do get the question, well, can I look at some examples of portfolios? Sorry to say, often it is quite difficult because students use it for classroom work or for assessment, or nurses can't share their portfolios necessarily because if they have a patient shown in an image, then that can be quite tricky privacy-wise. Or if you use portfolios at your own organization for professional development, you may not want to share all of that. And so what we tend to do is kind of find examples that are available freely and then share them with the community so that people can take a look. But that might mean that it's not exactly what you're looking for, exactly what you want to do. But the Mahara community is really friendly and everybody's generally open to being contacted. So if you do want to get in touch with somebody but can't find their email address, then please do let me know, because I can very easily make the connections for you to chat with them. This is Nurse Portfolio here in New Zealand, and organized by Namanukura Oapopo, the Māori Nursing and Midwifery Program that is led by Tama Campbell. And Nurse Portfolio itself was set up last year to make it possible not just for Māori nurses to keep their portfolio, but for any nurse within New Zealand to have a portfolio account. The site might change a bit in the future depending on how the DHBs take it up or whether they are having their own instance and so on. But what has been really nice, and we'll see a brief example later on, is that the nurses work quite a bit with templates because their standards are set. And so they get a template which has the standard in there, then they put their reflection in and any supporting evidence. And that way they can get through the portfolio process very quickly. In the past, and currently for many, it's a very long process to create your portfolio and then also for an assessor to go through the portfolio. But with the electronic portfolio, the amount of work that the nurses need to do and how long it takes them to create their portfolio has tremendously been cut down. And that is very useful, especially for anybody who's very busy. This is PALNet over in Australia. It's a site for principals, so Principals Australia Institute, and that site was started not so much as an e-portfolio site, but rather for social networking amongst principals. So they have a big focus on groups, and that's why we see groups in here, group discussions and so on. They also have a lot of customizations in there around scheduling events and bubbling up events that might be important and showing group discussions, because that's what they used it quite extensively for. In a later iteration, they also started looking more at the portfolio, especially the resume aspect. These were just some of the sites in general to give you an impression of that. To give you an impression that Mahara can look very different depending on what your organization's needs are. And especially if you have been working with open source software before, which I think pretty much everybody in the room has, because you're using either Moodle or Totara or have been using Mahara already or using WordPress for that matter, you do know that you can customize pretty much everything in there. And that's what's really nice, because you can just make it your own and not have to look like everybody else. Do you have any questions so far? I want to comment on something before we actually look at some of the possible ways of using a portfolio in different contexts.
If a student, in the wider sense, creates a portfolio and then they leave that institution, can they still have access to that portfolio?
That's a very good question, Brian. It's not an easy answer, so I'll provide you the options. One option is that if the Mahara site is hosted with the organization, then it's entirely up to the organization to say, yes, we give continued access to our students. It seems that increasingly universities are doing that. So Pace University in the United States started that. There are a couple of universities, at least in Australia, who give perpetual access to portfolios for their students. That is possible because the students don't need to be in the LDAP directory anymore when they leave and continue to have access to any of the other systems, but you can have an internal authentication method so that you just log in and you're not connected to any of the other systems but still have access to your portfolio. Some institutions only give access for, say, 6 months or a year, or they limit the amount of content that can be stored, but there's no limit on the Mahara side for that. So that's really entirely up to an organization. If it is not possible that the learner or former employee keeps their portfolio on your Mahara site, then they can always export the portfolio in the so-called Leap2A format. That's a portfolio export format, and that allows them to import it into another Mahara instance at their new workplace. So for example, if a Welltech student or Federia student starts at a DHB and they are not using the same Mahara site, then the student could export the portfolio, put it into the DHB portfolio and hit the ground running. Or they could export it into one of the Mahara sites that is freely available for individuals. And in some cases even export it into another e-portfolio system that also supports the Leap2A standard. So for schools, for example, my portfolio, the nice thing is that all schools are on one system. So actually when a student leaves a school, the student doesn't have to export the portfolio, but the portfolio stays in place and only their authentication method in association with the school changes, but otherwise their portfolio is there. So kind of taking away a lot of the extra steps that normally would need to be taken if every school had their own e-portfolio system.
That was one of the issues that we had, and because there's a policy of keeping access to for 6 months, and then we had to introduce a policy for keeping access to Mahara for that length of time, or it might be a year or two. And it's a complex issue that needs quite a lot of institutional policy. And we also found that some of the students who were using Mahara actually wanted to export to Facebook or something. And we also had to keep backup copies for assessment and moderation too. It was quite a lot of work and kind of thinking that through and deciding who does the backups and where we keep and all of that stuff too.
For academic organisations, it really needs to be tied in with their alumni approach, because it is a way of maintaining lifelong connection with your next graduates.
It can definitely be a bigger policy question around it, because if a student isn't at an organization or learn at an organization anymore, they still need to comply with terms and conditions and things like that. But as Richard said, especially for tertiary education institutions, continued access to the e-portfolio site might be really, really good, because then you don't have to join the external alumni network or the association needs to set up another system that they are paying for, but the alumni would still be in the system. You could easily message them, you could invite them to groups, you could invite them to career events for current students, for mentoring opportunities, but still also give them a different look and feel if you wanted to, and keep them separate from the other students. And so again, the technology allows for all that. It is more around what the institution wants and can afford and how it wants to proceed with that.
And the issue was the LDAP connection, so you
Yeah.
can be done. Just the syncing.
Yes, it can all, technically everything can be done. It is just how an organization wants to approach it, and then of course also data storage and kind of looking into content being not inappropriate and so on. That can scare some people away. But it looks like, especially kind of now that the focus is getting more onto really looking at a portfolio from the student perspective and seeing it as a student-centered tool, and also as a reflective tool, and also a way of using it for career opportunities, that thinking around giving students access to the portfolio for a longer time is becoming more important and also more accepted. But then, yes, Mohammed.
Yeah, I too have actually lost my login after leaving school. But my question is, can you really share your content with non-Mahara users or the same platform? Can you share with people who don't use Mahara?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so you can share your portfolio with anybody in the world if your environment allows for that. So if public pages are allowed, you can share it, and that's how we look at the examples that we are going to take a look at.
Okay.
Or you can share it with just your colleague, or with a group of colleagues, or just people who have an account. So that's what I really like about Mahara. It's very flexible, and with whom you can share your portfolio. So it's not like a one-for-all approach that blogging software oftentimes takes, where you kind of write your blog post and anybody online can read it. But with the portfolio, because there can be quite sensitive information in there, we are taking a reverse approach. Everything is private at first, and only when you decide that somebody shall have access to it, do you give access to it. But it's not automatically available to everybody. So let's actually take a look at some of the examples. So one way of using an e-portfolio is for having an online identity. These days that's becoming more and more important, and I bet a lot of you already have a scattered online identity all over the place, namely Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, other professional online networks that you are. Pretty much every association nowadays has at least a website, most likely a login, maybe even an email list, and all those places. And what you can do with a portfolio, as we said earlier, you can bring all this into one place and kind of present yourself and how you want to be perceived. So you can bring in things from other networks. And here's an example from Pace University. It's one of their students who decided to share her experiences about coming to the United States. You're not able to read everything through. I'm just showing you some visual cues of what portfolios can look like and what you can use them for. So she's used quite a bit of imagery in here to make her point. She reflects on her journey. She says why she came, the trouble she had to come through, and so shares that with others as part of her portfolio to show the world who she is, because that is really defining for her. You don't have to share as much. Your portfolio that you want to share with everybody can just be like a business card, and very simple, but point to a couple of things and then dig deeper as needed. Another way of using portfolios is for student projects. At Scotland's Royal College, the Barony campus, they are really, really active e-portfolio users. So if you do want to have a look at what they are doing, they are a fantastic example there. They actually used a student newsletter and created that on Mahara. So students were contributing stories to the newsletter. They wrote it in their own portfolios and then aggregated all of that in a group and made that available to the college. So instead of setting up a newsletter publishing tool, they used a tool that they already had available. And there may not necessarily be a lot of reflections in there, but it's still a portfolio project, more in the sense of a showcase portfolio. So things students are doing, showing off their skills in writing and pulling everything together for a newsletter. Traditionally, portfolios have been used quite extensively for language learning. In Europe, there are language portfolios and really nice paper ones back from the 90s, starting with schools. You have your language passport and things like that. Because what you want to see, especially in language learning, is your progress. And so what better way than to show what you were able to do at the beginning of the school year, to the mid of the school year, and then to the end. How many more words you can actually read, how much you can already read, how much you can express yourself, and things like that. And oftentimes a grade does not show that much, because it's a grade. If you move schools, the teacher might say, well, you shouldn't really have gotten an A, but that should have been a B, or the other way around. And whereas if you actually see the evidence and see what they have done, you can judge more easily where you think the student is at. And we also see the progress made between students more better. Because a student who started out with not knowing any words and then ending up with knowing 400 is kind of made more progress in a particular time frame than a student who already knew 200 words and only made it up to 400. And for that, you need to look at the evidence. A test doesn't necessarily tell you that. And so at Coventry University, as the language department uses portfolios to help students in becoming more proficient in the language. So they use reflective journaling, create short videos that they then share in the portfolio, and they document their writing skills that way. We've already heard an example from Sue earlier on how portfolios can also be used for assessment and assignments, because that's a big part in the PT DIP, and others around the world do that as well. So Mahara is not an assignment portfolio system. There are systems around that have grade books in there, that have rubrics and so on, that are more geared towards assignment. When Mahara was established, the decision was made to make it a personal learning environment. So really to focus on the learner and let the learner decide what they wanted to put into their portfolio. But of course, that doesn't mean that it can't be used for assignments and assessments, because you can easily connect it to Moodle or Totra and then have use the rubrics and the grade book within those systems to grade the portfolio, but then still have more reflective portfolios available for other purposes. And we are looking into getting some more assessment features into Mahara over the next year or so, because portfolios are being used more for assessments. But what we are more interested in than replicating functionality from the LMS is really looking at what assessments are particularly suited to portfolio practices. And that's around competency assessment. How can we get a competency framework in there so that it's easy to follow on which competencies have already been achieved, which ones still need to be worked on, and things like that, rather than to say, no, we need a quiz in the e-portfolio system as well. So really look at how can we improve what we already have without replicating all learning management system functionality. So watch this space for that. But as an example, again from the Barony campus, Ali Hasty shared an example of how they use it in equine studies. So like with hairdressers, Mahara and e-portfolios are being used in many different professions and study programs, and not just your traditional language learning or teacher registration and things like that. But it is very well suited for anything that has professional standards attached. And so here the students do connect to Moodle for the assessments, and they have all their they know what they need to put into the portfolio. They make all of that available in the portfolio, have instructions though in Moodle, and also connect to other systems. So it's a really impressive body of work that they can do in Mahara, and also the program is very well described under that link that you'll have available. It can also be used for research progress, because we've kind of looked at professional development, and at Massey University there was a PhD student, Wendy, and she actually shared and stored her PhD resources in one place in Mahara and made that available not just to herself, but also to her supervisor. So the supervisor was always up to date where Wendy was, and they could look at the same resources that she had produced and then discuss them, and didn't all have to go all over the place and find them, but have everything connected, and she used it then to also write her thesis with that help. It's also very well suited for tracking internship or internship progress, because in an internship, again, it is outside of university or outside of school, but we do want to see what students have done. And again, and actually I think more in the Be Teach, there is also the internship booklet is being, or the practicum booklet is being moved into an online version, so that the practicum can be assessed online and can also be stored more easily. And this is an example of the University of Caen in France, where the staff have developed an apprentice booklet so that the students can share their experiences, not just with the university lecturers, but also with their internship mentors and the companies that they have been at, to really show off what they have done. And so in this case, the students just introduce themselves, talk about their workplace and the work that they have done. In New Zealand, Sue McCurdy at the University of Waikato also uses e-portfolios with her students that are going into internship, for example, engineering and biology students. And what she said at Whistlefest earlier in the year was really, really interesting, because she said the students definitely have an edge over others who just provide a CV when they apply for a job. Not so much because of the evidence itself in showing what they have done, but also the visual cues that the students have in there. Because by having the visuals there, she said the employers get a better idea of who the students are. So if they see the student kind of with others around, everybody smiling, then they know they can really work well in a team, because they have done all those activities that they then also explain more in the portfolio. Or if they work with animals, then they see the relationships more also from the facial expressions and how they behave. And I found that really interesting, because I think oftentimes we don't really look at pictorial evidence of that so much, but because students oftentimes in pictures like to take selfies these days, I think it does make a lot of sense to also use that as in judging somebody when they apply for a job. And so those portfolios work really well. While portfolios may not really help when you apply for a job at a big company or with a recruitment agency who just have their table of things and things they want to look at, once you get to this interview stage, then it can become important, because then the person actually interviewing you looks at the evidence more closely. And we certainly do look at evidence of what potential employees who want to work with Catalyst have done, because we want to know what their coding looks like, how they can talk to clients, and therefore having a portfolio is also important for us. Which leads us to the career portfolio. At Southampton Solent University a few years ago, they've actually created resources or an entire course around employability and placement skills. And these things are still available online. They can be looked at. And if your organization is interested in setting something like up to help students or other learners getting those skills, then that might be a very good resource for you. Staying kind of more in the professional development route, it is also being used more for tenure and promotion. And I mean, similar to nurses, tenure and promotion has always been very paper heavy, because you needed to show what you have done. Kind of need to have the bibliography, student feedback, other people's feedback, letters, reference letters and things like that. And now people are looking into how they can do that online, of course. And so portfolios are a perfect place for that. And Keith Lander, he's a very, very good instructor at Purchase College. And he's also an open scholar, meaning he pretty much everything he publishes or everything he does is available openly for anybody to use. So he also very briefly decided to make his entire tenure and promotion portfolio available online. So if you're interested in that, you can take a look, see what he's gone through, and yes, he did get his tenure. And also had the possibility, by using a portfolio, to create it slightly differently from everybody else, and therefore again have people have the attention drawn toward how he's presented himself. He's able to use multimedia evidence, which otherwise would not really be easily possible. And so that's also again nice to working with the portfolios. In terms of professional development, kind of staying slightly under the promotional aspect, at the University of Warwick, Teresa McKinnon, for example, uses a portfolio for her CMOD application. That is an application into an association, and they are required to create portfolios because they are learning technologists. What better way to actually show off how well they are doing by providing evidence and reflecting on that. And so it's not just Teresa who's created a portfolio using Mahara, but also Stephen Bright from the University of Waikato, and then also Colin Simpson, for example, from ANU. Looking a little bit closer to home at nurse registration, I've already mentioned nurse portfolio earlier, but here's just a very brief example of the current state of where the portfolio is at. You have your competencies, competency indicators, then you can put your self-assessment in there, and then the evidence. So, may not really look like an exciting portfolio, but not everything has to be super flash and has to take a lot of time. Because what we also need to keep in mind for creating a portfolio, how much effort does everybody have available to do that? So that's why a lot of portfolios are still quite text heavy, because that's the easiest for people to do. That's what they are used to. And that is a very good start. I don't think we should be expecting people suddenly to become the multimedia whizzes and just go crazy with things, but they can start small. And once they got the handle of putting in their evidence on a regular basis, reflecting on things, then I think they'll naturally branch out and see what else they can do and how they want to do things differently. My stance on templates is always use it as a guideline, but then still allow people to change things around. So if somebody doesn't like 3 columns, rather wants to have 2 columns, then that should be possible, and not really make it very strict and what it should look like, as long as all the information is there. And also leave it up to them whether they wanted to upload a PDF or whether it should be a multimedia file, or maybe even actually speak their reflection into their phone and upload the audio file. Because that's been proven very useful with nurses at Wintec. They used a different e-portfolio platform, but what they did is they just called a number while they were driving or sitting on the bus, and they spoke their reflection, and then that made it into the portfolio. And that really helped for having an immediate reflection. Because oftentimes when you have to go back home to the computer, sit down and type, then you may not really want to, and then lots of hindsight gets into it. Whereas if they can just do it on their phone and speak into their phone, that really, really helps them for reflecting. And then also for any assessor or instructor who reviewed the portfolios, to get back to the students more quickly and also help them if they struggled with something. So have the freedom to do with or to use whichever format is useful and helpful for people who are reflecting on it. Sue earlier also mentioned that mentioned teacher registration, and the BTeach students do need to go through the practicing teacher criteria, formerly known as registered teacher criteria, and that's what a lot of teachers do on my portfolio. They use my portfolio, the instance for the schools, to do their PTC. And this is an example from Te Kowhai School up north. And the school has created that template in consultation with teaching staff, and they've refined it and made it available. Again, have all the criteria in there, but didn't just copy and paste what was on the brief from the ministry, but really also tied it in more with their school and with their school values. And so for them, it wasn't so much just putting the template up there. That would have been very easy, but it took them about a year to really get the reflective questions right and know what they wanted their staff to put in. And so again, this shows the concept behind the portfolio. Making it very purposeful is extremely important for it to be accepted and then also continued. And these are the examples that I wanted to share with you. I think it would be good if we just take a few minutes for you to stretch your legs and maybe get something else from the bag to drink and just have kind of 5 to 8 minute break, because we still have a bit of time left. And what I next wanted to do is kind of show you or kind of speak more in wider context around the possibilities that an e-portfolio allows you to do, now that you've seen some examples, just tying that together, and then we look at some of the new features. So I hope that with the examples that you've seen, that you've realized how versatile portfolio work and also Mahara can be, and seeing kind of a number of different examples. And since we do have quite a bit of different organizations here, I didn't want to hone in on one particular strand of things, but also give you the variety, because sometimes that also helps kind of to look at things from a different perspective. So before we continue kind of the wider areas that Mahara covers, are there any questions or comments, or do you want to maybe share your example? One of your examples.
How easy is the customization that you were showing? Is it intuitively easy to do, or do we need to have a techie person to help?
Which customization are you referring to, Sharon?
The grid formats that people are doing, and changing banners and headers.
So the theming customizations, the theme, that's relatively easy because we do provide a style sheet that can be changed. Now, in contrast to the earlier version that you're especially familiar with, Cheryl, of Mahara, we moved to Bootstrap. And so we're using common Bootstrap technology, which allows us to be responsive, kind of so go from a widescreen computer down to a mobile device, and the site still looks good. And also theming that can be done by one of your techies, for example, if they know how to create a CSS and how to change things in there, then they don't need anybody else, or otherwise we can assist with that.
So it's dependent on changing the CSS?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
But users can change some of their portfolio pages to a certain degree if skins are turned on. So skins are an easy way for people to add a background image, or to change the font, or to change certain colors for their portfolio and personalize it more, if the organization allowed for that. But otherwise it is usually branded. In terms of the customization you saw from the University of the Arts London, kind of that grid format of public pages, that is available already. That code is available publicly, so your techies could take that. We started looking into the code because we do want to put that functionality into Mahara Core, so that everybody of you using Mahara would have the possibility to access it easily. We just haven't had the time to do so yet. So it's still on the program. The code sits on a public repository, so where code is generally shared by that person, and we. If you want that, let me know, Cheryl, because I can send it to you. I don't think it's linked publicly anywhere yet, but we do have access to it, and it is open source, so it can definitely be used. And AUT University, for example, they used that code of the grid layout from the homepage to make an enhancement so that group pages can also be displayed like that. So we are in the very fortunate position with the Mahara project that we have a very good community who likes to share things, and so we do get contributions directly to the software from organizations around the world to improve things, because we still try to put a lot of features directly in the software so that organizations don't have to worry about installing third-party plugins or installing extra bits and pieces. But then also third-party plugins that are being created are shared with the community, or if they aren't shared yet publicly entirely, they can easily be sent via email. And that is extremely nice in a community like ours, where e-portfolios are still quite a niche compared to learning management systems. And so kind of having people develop their own special things, special features, and sharing them with the rest makes it really nice to offer those possibilities to others as well. So I've already mentioned that Mahara is learner-centered, and that's where it's really, really different to a learning management system. Learning management system already tells you what it is. It's a management system. So yes, it does have learning in there as well, but only as part. It's oftentimes that an instructor or teacher or the organization itself is invested in it and wants to get something out of it, reports or manage the learning of an organization and see where people are at. Whereas in the portfolio system, we really focus on the learner. And that also means that as administrator, I don't automatically have access to the portfolio. I still need to get access from the learner to the portfolio. I can masquerade as the user, like you can in Moodle and Totra as well, but that can be made transparent so that the user actually knows when you logged into their account and you know when that happened, because nobody really likes kind of when a colleague logs into the your professional development portfolio with you actually knowing about it, because there might be some very personal stuff in there. And so having that transparency in the system is really, really good. We've already mentioned it is mobile. You can view it on any device, no matter the size. It scales really nicely, especially our new version, which we started last year, or which we released in October last year. It uses modern technology, so if your developers already know Bootstrap, have changed things, they can employ similar rules. We are also working on finalizing our new mobile app, which will be available for Android and iOS and can also be made available for Windows, which makes it easier to upload content, upload learning evidence online, directly into the portfolio. And the distinguishing feature between the app and the website is that you can use the app when you're offline. So when you're out in the field or in an early childhood center that doesn't really have a lot of good internet connection because it's just in a rural area, then you can take your pictures, take your videos, write your reflection, store everything in the app, and then once you're back to a Wi-Fi hotspot or at home, you can just upload it. You can still use the website itself on the mobile device. That's why we didn't transport all the features into the app, because that would have just been doubling things up. But we really wanted to focus on the things that we can't yet do when we just have the website. So hopefully within a month or so, we'll be able to make that application, that app available. There are already 2 apps out there currently, but they don't really work with external authentication methods. So kind of like for Sue, she wouldn't be able to use that because her students log in via Moodle, and the app only recognizes internal Mahara authentication. But hopefully we'll have our much improved app available very soon. We've also already briefly spoken about theming. So it is themable. You can make it look similar to what your learning management system looks like, what your website looks like, so that you have a cohesive look and feel. Or you can also do it in quite differently if you'd like to have it very distinguished. And it is also customizable, either by adding plugins that are available in the community, changing functionality, just installing a different language pack if you work with international groups, or if you want to have Mari, for example, as a language, then you can install that language pack. You can change existing features around and make them more suitable to your needs. And then it can also be integrated with other systems, in particular, of course, Moodle and Totra as learning management systems, because incidentally, actually, Moodle developers became Mahara developers here at Catalyst, because we were the original developers for the software. And so some of our team kind of moved into a new software, and that's where some of the similarities are still there, if you look very closely. And so what we can do immediately is single sign-on between the two, and also Totra, between those systems, so that people are immediately logged in. You can transfer content from the LMS into the e-portfolio. So if your students wrote an essay and that is in the assignment, then that can be moved over to the portfolio, or glossary entries or forum entries and so on. And also you can assess a portfolio directly from within Moodle or Totra by installing a plugin, which allows you then to use your regular grading mechanisms and grading workflows instead of using yet another system. Now very briefly, what's actually new in this version? I already briefly mentioned that in October last year, we moved to the Bootstrap framework, and that was quite a big move. While we didn't change many features, we did change the user interface. We consolidated a lot of things. We made things more consistent, and that really, really had a great impact on us. And because we're using Bootstrap, it also looks more modern, because you're used to what Bootstrap websites look like. So you're used to a certain user interface, and having that available in Mahara as well also helps people to recognize things more easily, because they know what a button looks like or what the navigation looks like, instead of just having it slightly off. And so that was our version 15.10. We switched numbering systems last year in April, because we thought it's actually easier for our user community to know when their version of Mahara was released, rather than having some arbitrary number there. And that's why we switched to a date-based numbering system. So last April was April 2015, so our number is 15.04. And then the next version was released in October, so it's 15.10. Now we are in 1604, so we are releasing 1604. And that makes it easy, I think, for users to know how old their Mahara site is, the version they are using, instead of always trying to go back when was 1.10 released, or how old is that. And just makes it very apparent also for site administrators when they might want to look into upgrading their site. And so for this version, it is much smaller than last October's, because it always seems like time between October and April moves faster than between April and October, probably because we have Christmas and all those holidays in between. But nevertheless, we have some really nice improvements there. So if you are already using Mahara, you can look forward to that. Sue and Joss, it will be coming near myportfolio.school.nz at some point, most likely around July. We tend to make an upgrade during term break, during the winter break. And we'll again make an announcement there. And one of the big features that we were able to implement, thanks to a university in Switzerland, was that we don't use Flash to look Flash anymore. In the past, we had when you embedded videos and audio files, you always need to have Flash installed in your browser. And as many of you probably know, browsers deprecate that, don't make it available anymore. And also when you look at a site on your mobile device, Flash is not supported on those browsers. So now you don't have to worry about that anymore, because all the videos you put in particular MP4 and then the MP3 audio files, will display no matter which device you use, because we're using the HTML5 technology, which replaced Flash quite extensively. There's still one little Flash object left in Mahara, but that is okay, because you can still copy and paste the secret URL instead of clicking a copy button. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to replace that yet, because one of the major browsers doesn't support any non-Flash based solutions yet. So we just want to wait a little bit longer for that. What you can now also embed if you are very much into open source is open source formats like OTA for an open source audio format or OTB for an open source video format. And now that we have the HTML5 player, we are also looking into adding more formats that this player supports. But for most people it is really MP4 and MP3, that's the important bit. We've also made it easier to tag content. So if you use portfolios and if you have a big portfolio, kind of tagging really helps to keep organized. Because then you can say, this is for year 1, this is for year 2, or this is for my nurse registration, this is for my student nurse portfolio, and so on. And then you simply click on the tag and you see all your content that relates to that. So similarly to what you do on YouTube when you want to find things, or people being tagged in Facebook and so on. And it kind of looked a bit clumsy and old by now of what we were using. So we are updating our system to simply allow you to search. And if you already have a tag, it shows you the options that have the same letter, and then you simply select it instead of clicking on a long list of links. And especially if you have a lot of tags, kind of your list is really, really long. And now it's all condensed really nicely in this drop-down menu. And of course, you can add new tags very easily as well, and then they are being put into your pool. Seemingly small thing, but actually quite a bit impact, because it might make tagging easier for people because they're just used to using tags like that. How many of you have already heard about open badges? That is fantastic, because they are available in both Moodle and Totra. And they are kind of, if we make it very, very brief description, it's kind of mini credentialed, or you can use it for credentialing. So instead of handing out a paper certificate these days, you could hand out a badge, which is a digital representation. So you get an image, but that image actually includes a lot of information, and information about the course title, who has taught the course, or what you did in the course. And then, and that's where it ties in very nicely with portfolios, the evidence of what you have actually done in order to earn that badge, in order to earn that credential. And Mahara already had a plugin available for that, so that you can display your badge, the badges you earned in Moodle and elsewhere in Mahara directly. But now we've put that directly into Mahara itself, again to make it easier for people not having to install a plugin, and integrate it in the future better with other functionality. And so these are what the badges can look like. So I've earned badges by being at conferences. I'm not showing all my badges, there are a few more. But once you click on the image, it just pops up the metadata, and you can thus verify that you've actually earned that credential, or that you've really participated. Because anybody can fake a PDF file or a paper certificate. And so with the electronic badge, while it is not hacker-proof, like nothing is, you do have the opportunity to make something very easily available. And to be honest, I must say it looks much nicer than trying to scan in a PDF file and just putting that there. And you can very easily and quickly see what you have earned. Another nice thing about the badges is they can expire. So if you use badges, say, for health and safety courses in your organization, put that into Moodle or Totra and require everybody to kind of put that on their profile page. After a year, if they don't have the badge anymore, then you know directly that it's been expired, and they can't say, well, I still have that. No, the badge is gone after that time. So kind of working and making technology work for you in good ways. That's what badges are about, and of course any other technology as well. We've also improved our notification system, and earlier I mentioned that students on my portfolio do write to each other on the wall quite a bit, but they always needed to log into my portfolio in order to read those messages. Quite cumbersome in a way, and so now we actually send those out via email as well, making it easier again for them to interact then later on with the platform. I also mentioned that comments are quite important for portfolio commenting and giving feedback, because that way we can help learners to reflect more or to improve their learning and give them more advice. And your site can actually also have comment ratings. So you give your comment and then you give just a visual indicator of how much you like that. So it's a scale generally of 1 to 5, but now we've actually extended that so that you can't just give stars and 1 up to 5 stars, but you can give up to 12 and either change that into a heart, a thumb, or even a tick box, whichever symbol you like. You kind of have to focus on one, but you can decide which one it is. And you can also decide on the color. So kind of again, making it more for your organization, because as organization, maybe you don't really like the stars because they have a bad connotation, or you may not really want to use the heart, so you use something else, and so we provide that. It's also much easier now to embed from lots of different websites. In Mahara, you can already embed from many different social media sites like YouTube, Vimeo, Blip TV, and so on. But an administrator always needs to whitelist those pages because they are an iframe, they could potentially be malicious. But we now have the Embedly plugin, which has been in existence for many, many years already. We integrated that into Mahara, and now you can go to virtually anything, over 250 sites, and just embed things. And not have to bother your site administrator and ask them for every single thing. So that's really nice, again, to aggregate content from other sites. And also in version 15.10, we made it possible to have a journal everywhere. In the past, journals could only be written by individuals, but now groups can journal, an institution can journal, an entire site can journal. And so what we now also have available is another journal block, so that you can have all recent journal entries shown in a group and not just all journal entries at once. So again, just making more functionality available across the board. Now something a bit more for those people who do look into development of Mahara, or who might want to talk with their developer afterwards. We also want to make it easier for people to contribute to Mahara or to make changes to Mahara. And one thing of doing that is having a style guide available, so that people know, well, if I need a button, this is what a button should look like, so that it changes like any other button does and not reinvent the wheel for creating a button. And that's what style guides are for. So what you have is the style guide shows you what a side panel looks like, and then you have the code there that you can simply copy and paste, put into your code, maybe make some small changes around what you want to have displayed here and so on, but the essence is there, and you don't have to go hunting in the environment and find, well, where did I see that button last, or where was a table used that I want to use. So everything is in one place. And the even nicer thing about our style guide is you can look at it in any theme that is installed on your site, so that you see immediately what it looks like in your theme. So you don't always have to translate between the default theme and then what your theme is like, but you see it directly there. And it's very easily accessible. So that's another one of our themes. So you see here, just by changing the theme, the profile picture changed, but the code is exactly the same. It's all just done in the theme, but it's very quick for you to see. So now if you want to see more examples, or see what other people have done, or share what you're doing with portfolios and Mahara, I'd recommend you watch out for our newsletter 4 times a year, on the 1st of January, 1st of April, 1st of July, and 1st of October. Because there we share stories from around the world in using Mahara, announce events, share development stories, so that you know kind of some of the bigger things that are going on, or sometimes also small plugins that are being developed, and kind of learn more. You can of course also sign up on mahara.org for talking with others in the community. If you do so, please mention my name in there, because we do still need to register people individually, because a lot of students try registering on mahara.org to create their portfolios, for which they should actually go to their university's portfolio site and then wonder, why their teacher doesn't have access to it or why their login doesn't work, and so we kind of usually point them to their correct site, and that's why I look at all those things manually. But if you let me know that you've been here, then I definitely make the connection again to your name. And that registering on the site gives you the opportunity to talk with anybody in the community, be that in New Zealand or overseas. Ask your questions and then see if anybody has ideas or can share examples of how they've already done it. You might also want to take a look at our events calendar. It is a proper calendar, so you can subscribe to it so that it just comes into your calendaring software. Because we have events events on pretty much at least 1 or 2 every single month now, either online events or face-to-face events. And in New Zealand, we just had the first local Mahara hui at the University of Waikato last Thursday. Last year and the year before, we had a nationwide Mahara hui, but for this year, we decided to have smaller local events instead, to make it easier for people to come to those and not having to worry about long travel times or accommodation and so on. And so watch out for announcements on those. There'll be probably at least 2 or 3 later in the year. We'll definitely organize one in Wellington, so we'll be in touch after August for that. We haven't decided on a date yet, but it's most likely looking to be kind of 3 to 4 hour event, and we'll be organizing it here at Catalyst, so you already know where to go. And it will be more interactive than today, where you can also share things that you have done or contribute to it as well. And while we've been talking about software all morning, it is actually about the people who participate in it. The software is only a part of it, and being open source is part of it. It's a very important part because that allows us to involve all these many different people in the project. But it's not just the developers that are important in a software project. It is the people who give support, the people who actually use it, the people who report bugs or report new features, discuss new features, the people who do theming to make it look pretty. Because if we had developers theme our environments, sometimes it can go well, but oftentimes it does not. That's when you complain, say, well, it doesn't really look great. Can we have something else? And that's what we have our fabulous designers for, because they make things pretty, they make it usable. And then we also have translators who make it so that anybody around the world can use it. And many others, testers, documentation writers, and so on. So it is not just about software developers and software. It is really also around the users, because without you, we wouldn't exist. Because if nobody uses the software, then why continue working on it? And so your input is really always very important, so that we make the changes to keep you interested in using any software, not just Mahara. Alex?
What does Mahara actually mean?
I give that question back to the Kiwis here in the room.
Thinking or thought, I believe.
Yes, correct, Joss. Thank you. So, Mahara, to think or thought. Interestingly enough, it does also exist in other languages. So it also exists in Arabic, for example, and means excellence, and also excellence in learning. And so that is really great that it's not just within one culture, but also in another culture. Here. And so if you want to get started, oops, sorry. Oh no, I pressed the wrong key. If you want to get started, please get in touch with any of us, either Richard or me, or if you are already on an instance, you know how to get a hold of us. Want to get started on your own? You can do so as well. You don't need us for that, because it is open source software, so any of your techies can put it up on your server and can support it. But if you do want some support, then definitely jump onto the community forums, ask your questions, or if you want to come by here in Willis Street, we can certainly also look into that for you. So I hope there's been some useful things in this morning session for you. As if you haven't used e-portfolios yet, maybe it got you thinking a bit of what you might be able to do, how you might want to integrate it into the array of tools that you have at your organization, or if you've already started or want to get back into using portfolios, maybe some of the new features, also kind of ideas of how people have been using Mahara and e-portfolios over the last few years. Give me some thought to discuss with your colleagues and see if you want to get back into it or start using it. Thank you.